Thank you for tuning in to Macroview Television and welcome to a brand new edition of Taiwan Outlook, the program that presents the different faces and their stories on Taiwan. I'm your host, Wu Ruiguo. Europe is facing the biggest influx of refugees to the continent since the end of World War II. And what are some of the potential problems and challenges that will impose on European countries? We're going to find out on today's program because we are delighted to have Dr. Lu Chien-Yi, who is currently an Associate Research Fellow of the Institute of European and American Studies at the Academia Sinica, to analyze and identify some of the issues with us. Welcome to our program, Dr. Lu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wu. I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Yes. And Dr. Lu, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself to start off the program? I understand that you went to school and got your PhD at UT Austin.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Please.
I got my PhD from the University of Texas, Austin.
Okay.
From the Department of Government.
Okay.
And my specialty is European politics, especially European integration.
Okay.
And right now, I'm Associate Research Fellow at the Institute of European and American Studies at Academia Sinica.
Okay, good. And Dr. Lu, as I said, Europe, since last year, has been confronted with a problem that nobody really expected, which is the large influx of refugees, mostly from the Middle East. And certainly that has been, an issue for most of the European countries to deal with. Can you then tell us a little bit about the background about this large migration to Europe, please?
Yes, the migration, so-called migration crisis,
Yes.
was long in the making. It appeared to us that it's a shock to the European Union countries.
Yes.
But in fact, it's been brewing for years, in
Really?
fact. Yeah. We all know that in 2011, the so-called Arab Spring spread to Syria,
Yes.
which is the main area where the refugees come from. But I want to point out, of course, everyone knows about the Syrian civil war now.
Okay.
Prior to the breakout of the civil war, there was years of drought in some areas in Syria. And there was severe shortage of food, and which caused widespread social unrest. And a lot of scholars have linked this to climate change. And actually, the Arab Spring in other countries, in Egypt, was also some people, and even the crisis in Darfur years ago, had its cause identified as climate change. So so the root cause of this wave of refugees, the causes were long in the making, and it's very complicated. It has a lot to do with, and also the invasion of Iraq years ago by mainly the US and the UK was active in the invasion of Iraq, and later Libya. The way the US and the UK dealt with Iraq and Libya had contributed to the situation right now in Syria. So Syria has had a pre-war population was just about the same as Taiwan, around 22 million. And right now, half of the population has been displaced. Some internally, around 6-7 million displaced people within Syria. And a lot went to Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey, and Iraq, maybe Egypt. And it's just a small fraction of these people who went to Europe. And right now, Europe is still panicking over this.
This is very serious in terms of the kind of impact that this influx of refugees could have on the European economies, on its people. And let me ask you then, given the fact that you have all these, large numbers of refugees coming into Europe, what has been the consequence so far? Because we know this is ongoing, this will continue. But so far, has there been some serious consequences that we have seen already taking place in Europe or parts of Europe that's because brought on by the refugees?
I'm afraid we haven't seen the real consequences because I'm sure the situation is going to be worse because there's estimation that the number is going to be 4 million soon in Europe, the wave of refugees. Right now it's over 1 million. And I think we have seen the polarization of European societies. Some countries, it's worse in some countries than others. But I think instead of saying that the refugee crisis has caused problems in Europe, or I would rather think that the crisis has revealed how fragile the European, how fragile the project is. Because for years we were taught, at least when I was doing my PhD, and a lot of young students, they learn about European integration by learning that it's about solidarity, it's about value, it's about human rights. But right now, Europe is really being hit by a series of crises, not just the refugee crisis. Prior to that, we all saw the Euro debt crisis and the Greek debt crisis. And in those crises, we know, we found out, no, it's probably not about value. It's probably about self-interest, of each nation. And right now, the refugee crisis just further demonstrates that there is tiny little bit of solidarity in this European project. Germany and Sweden is probably the two best performing countries so far. All the rest, they were like having a race to the bottom competition. How can I do little? How can I do less than I have already done? So it's really a sad situation.
And Dr. Lu, we understand that, this will obviously have an impact on some of the migration that would normally happen, for people who want to go to Europe to study, to work, to have a family. And how would this, the influx of refugees have on the, the policies that many of the European countries already have regarding vis-a-vis migration?
This is one of the sad things, I think. Since the so-called globalization, we would like to think that people can move around freely. And that's just not true. People are able to move around freely if you have high market value. So this so-called free movement of people, it really is about your economic value. If you are valuable in terms of the price, market price, then you're welcome. But against this background of migration, refugee crisis, we need to get our priorities straight. These are people, under international law, there was a convention signed after the World War II in 1951. This convention on the status of refugees stipulates that countries cannot turn away people who need help, people who are escaping their countries for fear of their lives, whether it's war or human rights abuse or political crackdown or religious reasons. So under international law, those who need help, we have obligations to let them in. It's true that there are so-called fake refugees, or there are potential refugees who are not qualified as your policy to become a asylee. But still they have the right. You can screen them, but you need to fulfill your obligation as a member of the international community. The priority right now under the current circumstances is, of course, refugees first. Economic migrants second.
Yes.
But right now, a lot of European leaders, they are trying to mix up the two. David Cameron, he has said the vast majority of people crossing the Mediterranean Sea are economic migrants who want to take advantage of our systems. That's just not true, because a large majority of the application for asylum from these war-torn countries, 80%, 90%, 95% of them got granted asylum status. So a lot of them were really refugees who had no place to turn. So they come here. But refugees are different from economic migrants in the sense that their lives are threatened, their properties are threatened, their homes are gone. So economic migrants, they are just people who want to have better lives, study or work or make more money. And a lot of European politicians, they are trying to mix up the two and tell people that they are just economic migrants, and that's not the truth. And I would also like to point out that they do not just mix up migrants, economic migrants, with refugees. We hear them talk about human smugglers a lot and equate them to human traffickers. In fact, we can differentiate the two.
Yes, we should be able to.
Yeah, the human traffickers are usually the one who prey on people, and they not just only smuggle them to another country illegally. They also exploit these people and force them to work as slaves in sweatshops or sex industries as prostitutes to pay for their trips. But right now, a lot of so-called human smugglers, yes, they are doing something that's illegal. They smuggle the refugees to Greece or Italy or other countries. Yes, it's illegal, but that's the only way these refugees can reach these safe regions, safe countries. And these so-called smugglers, they don't, unlike the traffickers, they don't continue on to exploit these people, force them to...
Upon arrival.
Right. So there's a difference between the two.
Thank you, Dr. Lu, for sharing that background, behind the migration crisis in Europe. But let me ask you, in addition to the route by sea, by the Mediterranean Sea into Europe, what are some of the possible alternative, routes that we have discovered that will allow the refugees to come into Europe?
Roughly 80% of the refugees who reached Europe in the past year came by sea. But there are also, through the land, the refugees, they go to Turkey, and from Turkey, they would go to Bulgaria and up to Romania, and some went to the Balkans through the land to Balkans, and from Macedonia to Serbia, and then to Hungary, and some through Croatia, Slovenia, and a few thousand who took a who flew to North Pole, and from North Pole, from Russia, from a town called Murmansk. They then, some of them took bicycles to Norway. But the routes keep on shifting because when they find out more borders are closed, they will change their route. So far this year, there has been over 85,000 refugees who had reached Europe, and over 420 people have died. And if you compare the number to the same period last year, it's 13 times as many. So given the weather is not suitable for boat rides, right? But that just shows how bad the situation is. And it also tells you that it's not going to be be better. Okay. It's going to be worse.
Yeah, like I said, I think most of the European countries, if not all of them, really expected, this to happen. And then when it happened, especially starting last year, that they were really, not prepared to respond. And one particular incident that really hit, a lot of people emotionally is the fact that in September 2015, there was a photograph of a drowned 3-year-old boy named Alan, upon reaching the shores in Europe. And then that certainly, that was something very emotional for many people, even for people who were not paying attention to the migration crisis in Europe before they started paying attention to how serious this problem has become. What did you think that particular, photograph or that particular publication in the newspapers really had, a consequence on some of the policies that European countries and governments have pursued? Has that really made a significant change in the sense of opening up their borders, making them more inclusive, welcoming many of these refugees from the Middle East?
I think for a short while, the photo did have its impact.
Okay.
Because shortly after the media frenzy of that boy, the EU appeared to have put together their actions. Okay. And soon after that, European countries, their special summit, they decided that they are going to relocate refugees from the hot spots like Italy and Greece, relocate around 160,000 refugees to different
countries and
member states. Yes. Yeah, it's a semi-quota system.
Okay.
But in fact, most countries, not most, a lot of significant players, they refuse to accept this system, notably Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland.
Right.
So they resist this arrangement. But so far, and the implementation is a huge problem. It's one thing that some of the member states agreed that we are going to accept some from Greece and Italy. But to actually implement is a different story.
Yes.
So very slowly, there are some refugees who have been sent to countries like Luxembourg very slowly under this scheme.
Okay.
And also the impact of that photo was short-lived, because we all know that soon after, in I think November, the terrorist attack in Paris, it had turned around the previous the momentum.
Yes.
And so in August, actually, Germany, they suspended the so-called Dublin regulation. Dublin regulation is the regulation that regulates the EU member states, because EU member states, they have open border policies among themselves.
Yes.
So that's why they need to have unified external policies regarding asylum standards. So in the 90s, the EU member states, they have to unify their refugee policies or asylum policies. So they have principle, it's a first safe country principle. So under that principle, the first safe country that a refugee reaches, the first country has to process, has to deal with this refugee.
Okay.
So you understand that inland countries, they'll never be almost never be the first safe country. So they almost have no responsibility. They have very little responsibilities when things like this happen. So in August, Merkel, last year, she suspended the Dublin Convention, which was the Dublin regulation, which was a well-intentioned behavior, because so that people who reached Greece, which was considered the first safe country, can move on to other countries like Germany.
Yes.
But later, last year, after the Paris attack, Germany resumed the Dublin Convention, the Dublin Regulation. So that means the first safe country is responsible for the refugee. But it's not possible because the influx of refugees to the forefront areas, Greece, Italy, Hungary, it can work. The Dublin principle, it can work. You cannot ask the one or two countries. Right, right.
And Dr. Liu, we understand a very important consideration for many countries in Europe is that whether these refugees, when they do come in, are they able to survive economically? However, we also understand that roughly half of the refugees are people, are children or, teenagers. They simply do not have the skills or even the language abilities to try to assimilate to their host country, whichever that may be, Germany, France, or whoever. But given the fact that since they're coming into these countries at such a tender age, and if they don't have the skills, they don't have the language sets available to try to assimilate, how can we expect them to become a productive member of the society and try to contribute their fair share of economic, responsibility if we don't have the tools to help them assimilate their education, the training, even the language and the culture, exposure that they need for them to, feel adapted in their host country. What do you think?
You're absolutely right. I think it's very, very important. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that this is easy or this is simple. I think it's very difficult. Usually the procedure is such that the refugees reach Europe and you need to register the refugees. They need to file application for their asylum. Yes. And before they are granted asylum status, they are waiting. And usually during this waiting period, they are not allowed to work. No. But once they are granted, they should be able to contribute, as you said, to contribute to the society as a member of the society. The quicker they are integrated, assimilated, I better use the word integrated, not assimilation, integrated to the society, the better. You don't know, because Einstein, he was a refugee. You don't know what they will achieve.
Contribute.
Yeah, it becomes one of us. Right now it seems that it's them, it's us, but the better you integrate them, the sooner they will integrate and contribute to the society. Yes. So the children, because the waiting process will be long because there are so many people. Yeah. Plus, a lot of the member states have tightened their family reunification standards. Right. So that means some children, before they have to wait 1 year to reunite with their family. Now they can wait for 3 years. So right now, 1 in 2, 1 in 3 refugees in Europe are children under the age of 15. Okay. And a lot of them are unaccompanied children. So, so they are, in a sense, on their own. Yeah. And that as you mentioned,
it's doubly difficult. Yes.
It's difficult, and if they miss their education, that is huge, because that means they lose their skills to make a living, to make contribution to the society. Yeah. So it's a challenge, but the better the European countries come to terms with the fact that it's not going to stop, more are coming, and they better integrate them sooner, because otherwise they become a source of disability, liability, and they also become good recruits for the ISIS, right? If they don't have education, if they don't have work, if they are for long term out of work, unemployed, it's not good news for European countries.
Of course not. Okay, we need talking about the kinds of problems and challenges that the European countries are facing, regarding the migration crisis. And we understand this is probably only the beginning, the tip of the iceberg. And we have already seen some, negative, if we should say, not so positive consequences from the migration crisis in the city of Cologne in Germany. regarding charges made against some of these refugees over sexual assault. Of course, this, could be another case when the sentiments could turn around against the refugees, not thinking then, hey, you're in my country and you're not doing things that are productive, and you're creating more social cleavages and also problems for the society. What do you think if over time incidents similar to this have accumulated, and the media continue to, report about them, and then the public will have a different perception, could have a different perception regarding the refugees? What do you think?
I think it's true that the so-called incident had played a huge role in the public attitude.
Yeah, okay.
But in fact, the Cologne police arrested, I think, 58 suspects.
Okay.
And of those 58 suspects, only 3 were newcomers, new arrivals, new refugees from Syria or Iraq. So all the other were from, I think, North Africa. They were older refugees, and some stayed in Germany for a long time and even got German citizenship.
Really?
Yeah. So it's of course the extreme groups they capitalized on the event. They would like to, spread fear and portray the
this
situation.
Is the wrong policy.
Yeah, this is the wrong policy. Don't let them come.
Okay.
The Syrians are dangerous. We let them come, and look what they did.
Okay.
But if you look at the crimes in cities like Cologne, a lot of extremists, the extreme far-right groups, they commit a lot of crimes, including setting refugee shelters on fire. There were many arson cases. Yeah. So it's legitimate, as Merkel said, that if you want to get asylum, if you want to get asylum, once you commit a crime, you're out. I think that's legitimate, that's reasonable. And in every society, we have good people, we have bad people, we have criminals, we have, so you do not, of course, that's our brains telling us this emotionally. I think it's very, very bad. It's very, very bad for the refugees. It's bad news for refugees.
Yes. And Dr. Lu, I don't want to sound redundant, but let me ask you if you agree that the migration crisis that we're seeing today in Europe has really further divided the European Union instead of solidifying them. Because a lot of people, before, look at the EU, formation process as a success. People putting aside their historical, even religious differences, and trying to come together and form this union. But, under the microscope of this, migration crisis, then we see a lot of the problems are now emerging. Okay, so would you think that this crisis has further divided the union instead of unifying them under a common cause?
Definitely. I think Europe is more divided now. I think when the European Union was first established, and everybody thought it's great, it's a good thing.
Yes.
I'm not saying that it's not a good thing, but only through crisis or tests, challenges like these, you get to see the nature of this union. And right now, other than the debt crisis, other than the refugee crisis, there's the Brexit problem. Britain may get out of the union. Yeah, so that also by itself, it also complicates the current refugee crisis, because the UK is behaving as though you want me to stay, then don't bother me with these refugees. And a lot of speeches or language used by David Cameron was not adequate. He used words like a swarm of people coming to Europe. He used the word for birds, for flies, for bees. You don't use it on humans. So these toxic language will come back to hurt these politicians and Europe as a whole, because it sends the message to the public that we are not supposed to help them. We don't want them. They are fake. They are trying to steal things from us. What happened to that Europe we thought Europe was? Human rights, value, the lessons of the Second World War, the Jewish people, the Jewish refugees. That's how we had these conventions on the status of refugees. That's how we recognized that you don't send them back. That's your obligation. That's your responsibility. That's how we learned it, but now it dissipated.
It's all gone.
It's all gone.
Yes. And let's turn the table around. And what do most of the refugees look at the situation? They, of course, get news and information. Some of the countries do not welcome us or less welcoming us. And we're going to be in this refugee camp used to maybe 6 months or a year. Now it's going to be 1 to 3 years. How do they respond? How do they feel like that, hey, we're being pushed away, we're not welcome? So, the camp could become, like you said, hotbed for recruits for ISIS. What do you think?
I think the European countries really need to be very careful with this.
All right.
How the refugees feel depends on how they are treated.
Of course.
And they don't, I'm not talking about the fake ones.
No.
The real refugees, they have nowhere else to go. The death toll in Syria and how they lost their home, the misery. They lost their sons, their daughters, their father, their mother. They lose their limbs. They lose their eyes. They lose their home, their education, their work, everything. So you really don't want a lot of people surrounding you or within you to feel resentment against you.
Yes.
Because that's just not smart. That's not the right, if you are panicking, you may resist these people. You may continue to be denial. But once you calm down, you need to recognize that's the fact that's not going to go away.
No.
You need to have warm heart and cool head, not the other way around. So it really depends on how the European countries treat them. And right now it's still too early because it's still ongoing and a lot of them are still in the process.
Okay. And let's again reverse the angle. How about some of the locals in the European countries? People look at, with the influx of refugees that we're taking in. Of course, taking care of these refugees will need money. All right? Some of them, of course, will get donation, and some of these refugees even have some limited resources with them from the home country. However, if they stay and, for example, granted asylum status, they become part of the local community. They're going to, of course, take up some share of the socio-economic, budgets, education, healthcare, social welfare. And when the pie is only so much, what the size is, and the portion that used to goes into healthcare, education, and other social welfare areas are now becoming smaller, or more people are dividing them. What do you think? Would this also be, from the other angle, more resentment among the locals when their socioeconomic, benefits or privileges are being taken away or being undermined? What do you think?
First of all, I want to point out, other than those who resent the fact that there are refugees getting their pie, I hear a lot of heartwarming stories about local people who just reach out to help these refugees in almost every country, even the countries that kind of have a bad name about the refugees. People individually. So among individuals, there are very different attitudes. So we don't generalize them. Having said that, the perception that these refugees will take away our prosperity, our pie, our social welfare, it's an emotional, notion. It's not a fact, because a lot of studies have shown in 20 advanced countries, among 20 advanced countries, 19 got better off because they have accepted more migrants and refugees. In other words, the pie doesn't stay the size it is now. The pie grows bigger if you let them integrate, if you let them contribute, if you let them become Einstein, right? So they can contribute. It depends on your attitude and your policy. How the welfare system is not a closed system.
No.
It flows. It's a free flow.
Evolves. Yes.
So it all depends on the conception that it's closed. It'll remain this size. It doesn't grow bigger. It's a myth. It's not the truth. And concerning the money for these refugees, the UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, they had a conference, a funding conference for these Syrian refugees. And I think it's in last month, it pledged for $11 billion. So it's a lot of money. Last year, about the same time, when UN pledged for money to fund these refugees, it got very little, maybe millions. And among 26 member states of the EU, they donated something like 5,000. So that was last year, around this period.
So the situation now changed because the problem is a lot more serious than it was last year. Let me ask you, if the crisis, continue, why is it that people looking in from the outside, seeing the crisis only happening in Europe, other than the fact because of geographic affinity? But how come it's not taking place, for example, in the United States or in some of the major economies like Japan or parts of Southeast Asia? Why is it only happening in Europe?
I think the geography, as you mentioned, is the main reason. And also because Europe has this reputation of
becoming more inclusive.
Especially what happened during the Second World War. The performance of Germany this time, I think it has a lot to do with its history. It has this extra obligation that it has to do more. And so geography and history and the reputation of Europe probably explain why this happened in Europe. And the United States, it's far, other than being far from the center. The U.S. has not been very friendly to refugees, I shouldn't say that. I'm talking about a lot of people from Central America. They try to go to the United States because there is a lot of violence in Central America, drug-related. So people, just like the Syrians, they are escaping for their lives. So they want to reach the U.S. And within the U.S., especially the Republicans, they just don't want them in. And right now, because of the presidential election, it's extra sensitive. Nobody wants to lose votes by talking or mentioning the refugee situation. So even from within America, from Central America, people trying to go to the U.S., the U.S. government begged Mexican government, can you keep them within Mexico? It's the same thing in Europe. Germany tries to strike a deal with Turkey, begging Turkey, giving Turkey lots of billions of money. Can you keep them within Turkey? Don't let them come to our land. Just let them stay where they are. But already, Turkey has already taken in 2.5 million Syrian refugees. That's a lot. And Turkey itself does not have a very good record on human rights, especially under the current president. So Europe is asking Turkey to keep all the refugees, don't let them come to Europe. And at the same time, you hear European officials condemning Turkey when at certain border points, Turkey would not let Syrian refugees coming into Turkey. European officials condemn Turkey. How can you refuse to receive these people? It's your obligation. Yeah. It's your responsibility. But keep them there. Don't let them come. So this concept of outsourcing refugees is very hot now internationally. It's terrible because usually those countries where they get the deal of outsourced refugee camps, the situations are bad. Yeah. They are detained in bad refugee camps. It's not does not meet the humanitarian standard. Right. But U.S. is doing that. Europe is doing that. Canada has done more because of the new government, the more liberal government. It has received 25,000 so far. So Canada is probably the better case here.
Okay. And Dr. Lu, because of a combination of reasons and factors, Taiwan, of course, is not in this migration crisis that we're seeing happening in Europe. And really, nobody, hopes that this will happen again, in and around Taiwan in the future. But let's just, for the sake of argument, that it does happen sometime down in the future. What can we learn from this migration crisis that we're seeing in Europe today, that we can prepare our government policies and also people's mindset in Taiwan to deal with a similar crisis if it should happen in the future?
I think the Taiwanese people are famous for their generosity.
Yes.
So the least we could do in a situation like this is to help, especially financially at least. Okay. But other than that, if there are refugees who come to knock on our doors, I think as a member of the international community, we have the obligation we need to screen, we need to have our system installed to turn back those who are not legitimate. But accept those who are true refugees, who truly need help. So at least we should do that.
Okay. And how about, the situation gets more and more troublesome and the number of refugees continues to grow and there's no consensus among the European countries. What do you think will happen next regarding this migration crisis? Or, individual European countries just, say, hey, forget it. We're not going to a uniform policy on this, then we're going to just do it our own. We have our own set of criteria or standards, and we're not going to care what other peoples do. What do you think?
There is no doubt in my mind that the situation is going to get worse from here.
Okay.
The number is going to grow.
Okay.
And right now, it's a downward spiral among the member states, what they are showing, what they do. And I don't know what's going to happen next, but I think the situation is going to remain bad for a long time because it seems to me most member states still have not come to grip with what's actually happening, the fact that it's not going to stop, it's not going to go away, and they are going to spill over to Europe. It's not going to change. So I don't rule out the possibility that the European Union is going to, it's possible for it to fall apart one day. I don't know when. I'm not saying that it's going to happen soon, but this is really a big blow to European integration.
Okay. And let's suppose the situation gets worse. The refugees just keep coming, and the European countries cannot get their act together. There is no consensus formed. Do you then expect maybe other, leading international players like United States, Russia, or even China will extend a helping hand in terms of trying to alleviate the impact that this migration crisis has already had on European countries. Do you foresee that as a possible scenario in the future?
Big corporations have a big say in world politics, in American politics. And in these incidents, in these situations, the defense industry, the arms dealers, the weapon manufacturers, they have a say. They may not want for the crisis to be over too soon because the stock value of their companies skyrocketed. So it's really complicated, and let's not be naive here because it's so many different interests, economic interests and geopolitical, and look at Russia, what it's doing right now. And Turkey and Kurds, each one at the Syria battlefield has their own interests. And the most important thing for now is for the war to be over. But we don't see how it's going to happen yet. It's just a sad, very bad situation.
Do you think that, finally, the international organizations like the United Nations may do more to try to resolve or alleviate this migration crisis?
I think the United Nations has done a lot. Especially the humanitarian, the relief operations. And as to the peace talk, the big players, it's just so complicated and it's so difficult. I'm not capable of predicting which way it's going to go, but I just sincerely hope that it can be over soon.
And Dr. Lu, thank you very much for being a special guest on our program today. Certainly want to wish you all the best in your future personal and professional endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching our program today. I'll see you next time on MacroView Television. Thank you.